My wife's cheating and my daughter's betrayal broke me. But I rose stronger and delivered a cold revenge that left them both empty-handed. That evening, she was in the shower and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't even glance at it, but something about the way she grabbed it earlier, clutching it tightly when I walked past, planted a seed of doubt. My gut told me something was off, and for the first time in years, I listened. I unlocked her phone. She never bothered to hide her passcode, probably because she never imagined I'd look, or maybe she thought I'd never have the guts to check. But there it was, staring back at me. The first message made my stomach drop. I can't stop thinking about last night. You drive me crazy. I froze. My fingers felt numb as I scrolled through message after message. Explicit photos, plans to meet up, nicknames that made my skin crawl. My wife, the woman I trusted, the mother of my child, was having an affair. And not just any affair. She was involved with someone younger, someone who made her feel alive again. Those were her words. The shower turned off, and I panicked. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back where I found it, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, I was already breaking. My mind raced. Was this recent? Had it been going on for months? Years? When she stepped out of the bathroom, she barely looked at me. She was texting again, her lips curled into a little smile I hadn't seen in months. And now I knew why. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to process what I had seen. Later that night, I tried to confront her. I asked who she had been texting so much lately. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she laughed and said, "Are you seriously checking up on me? God, you're so insecure." Her words stung, but it was the look in her eyes that hurt more. It wasn't fear or guilt. It was disdain, like she no longer saw me as someone worthy of her respect. She turned over in bed, dismissing me completely. That's when I knew this wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. She had already decided I wasn't enough for her. The next morning, I overheard her talking to our daughter. They were laughing in the kitchen, and then I caught it. My wife's voice, sharp and mocking. "Your dad is getting paranoid in his old age. He actually thinks I'm cheating." My daughter laughed. That sound cut me deeper than any words ever could. My own daughter, my little girl, was turning against me. She was only repeating what she had heard from her mother, but it still felt like a betrayal. I stood there, hidden behind the wall, listening as they tore me down like I was nothing. I didn't say anything that day. I didn't yell or demand answers. Instead, I went to work and stared blankly at my desk, replaying the conversations over and over in my head. I thought about the years I had spent building this family, the sacrifices I made, the late nights and early mornings to make sure they never went without. And for what? To be mocked and discarded, like I was worthless? That's when the anger started to grow. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was cold and calculating. I knew then that I couldn't let this slide. I wouldn't let them take everything from me. Not my dignity, not my peace of mind. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. But they had no idea what I was capable of. I couldn't shake the words I had overheard, the laughter, the mockery. It played in my head like a broken record, each repetition twisting the knife a little deeper. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. A few days later, I decided I couldn't let it fester any longer. I needed answers, real answers, not smirks and dismissal. That evening, I sat at the dining table waiting for her to come home. When she finally walked through the door, dressed in new clothes I'd never seen before and wearing perfume I hadn't smelled on her in years, I knew this wouldn't end well. "Sit down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes but sat, tossing her bag onto the counter like she couldn't care less about the tension filling the room. I didn't sugarcoat it. "I know what's going on," I said. "I saw the messages. I know about him." For a split second, I thought I saw panic flash in her eyes, but then, just like that, she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but one that was sharp and dismissive. "Are you serious?" she scoffed. "You've been spying on me? God, that's pathetic. Pathetic." That's what she called me. I stood my ground, though my hands were clenched so tightly under the table that my knuckles turned white. "Don't try to turn this around," I said. "I trusted you. I built this life for us, and this is how you repay me?" She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed like she was bored. "Built this life?" she repeated mockingly. "Oh, please. You think working your 9 to 5 and coming home to sit on the couch makes you a man? Let me tell you something. You stopped being a man to me a long time ago." Her words hit harder than any punch I had ever taken. But before I could even respond, our daughter walked into the room, drawn by the raised voices. That's when things went from bad to unbearable. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone already laced with annoyance. Before I could answer, my wife spoke for me. "Your dad's throwing a tantrum because he can't handle the truth." My daughter smirked. "Maybe if you acted like a real man." she said, echoing her mother's words. Mom wouldn't need to look elsewhere. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, was siding with her. Not just siding with her, but mocking me, ridiculing me like I was nothing. I tried to keep my composure, but I couldn't hide the crack in my voice when I said, "You don't know what you're talking about." Her response? Another smirk. Whatever. Maybe if you weren't so weak, she wouldn't be so bored. I can't explain what it's like to hear those words from your own child. It's like something inside you dies. The worst part? I couldn't even blame her completely. She didn't get those ideas on her own. They'd been fed to her, slowly, carefully, poison disguised as loyalty to her mother. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lash out, but I didn't. Instead, I just stood up and walked out of the room, leaving them both laughing behind me. I sat in my car for hours that night, replaying every moment, every word, until the anger took over completely. They thought I was weak. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the car until my legs went numb and my fingers were stiff from gripping the steering wheel. My mind kept replaying the laughter, the smirks, the words that cut deeper than I thought was possible. But somewhere between anger and humiliation, something shifted. I stopped thinking like a man who'd been broken. Instead, I started thinking like a man who had nothing to lose. The first thing I did was get my emotions under control. I couldn't afford to act impulsively, not with so much at stake. I spent the next few days observing, quietly, calculatingly. I acted like I'd accepted my place, like I'd given up. I let them believe they'd won. But behind that mask, I was working. I started with the finances. I went through every account, every investment, and every shared asset. My wife had no idea how much power she'd handed me over the years. She let me handle the bills, the savings, the mortgage, everything. She trusted me to keep things running while she played the part of the carefree wife. That was her first mistake. I met with a lawyer, someone discreet and ruthless. I laid out the situation without sugarcoating a single detail. I wanted to know exactly what I could and couldn't do legally. The answer was better than I expected. Since most of the assets were in my name, thanks to my wife's refusal to worry about paperwork, I had the upper hand. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly moved pieces into place. I transferred funds into private accounts, froze joint credit cards under the guise of fraud protection, and adjusted ownership of key assets like the house and car, ensuring my name was the only one that mattered. All the while, I played the role of the defeated husband perfectly. I still came home every night, ate dinner at the table, and listened to their whispers and laughter as if I couldn't hear them. I even apologized once, pretending I was trying to make things work. But the hardest part wasn't pretending, it was enduring. I had to sit there and watch as my wife came home later and later, dressed in outfits she never wore for me. I had to watch my daughter roll her eyes every time I spoke, treating me like a burden in my own house. There were moments when I wanted to snap, when I wanted to throw everything I'd prepared in their faces and burn it all down just to see their reaction. But I didn't, because I knew patience would make the fall even harder. One night, while my wife was in the shower, I found her second phone, the one she thought I didn't know about. I took screenshots of everything, messages, photos, plans to move in together once the divorce was finalized. She even joked about how easy it would be to leave me with nothing because I was too stupid to see it coming. I saved it all, not because I needed proof, I already had that, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to see her arrogance, her cruelty, and remind myself why I couldn't let this slide. By the end of that week, the trap was set. They had no idea that the foundation they were standing on was already crumbling, that every word, every laugh, every insult had only fueled the fire that was about to consume them. I wasn't broken. I was waiting, and they were running out of time. The night I found her second phone was the night everything changed. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was focused. Every move I made from that point on had a purpose, and there was no turning back. I knew the only way to truly take them down was to make sure they never saw it coming. The first step was making myself invisible. I kept playing the role of the broken husband, the man who was too weak to fight back. I let her think she'd beaten me, and let my daughter keep looking at me like I was worthless. Every eye roll, every snide remark, every insult only fueled the fire burning inside me. But on the surface, I looked like a man who'd given up. Meanwhile, I tightened the noose. I started selling off assets under the pretense of consolidating debt, something my wife didn't even question because in her mind she was already planning her exit. I liquidated investments, transferred stocks, and even sold a rental property we owned, depositing the money into a private account she didn't know existed. Then came the house. She didn't notice the legal changes I made to the deed. I removed her name entirely, leaving me as the sole owner. I kept the bills paid and the utilities running, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But on paper, she had no claim to it anymore. I also hired a forensic accountant to track down any debt she might have racked up without my knowledge. It turned out she had maxed out multiple credit cards, taking trips and buying gifts for the man she was cheating with. That information would prove useful later. And then there was my daughter. This part hurt the most. As much as I wanted to protect her, I couldn't ignore how far she'd turned against me. I dug through her social media, her texts, her photos. What I found made my blood boil. She had been helping her mother hide the affair, covering for her, lying to me, even encouraging the relationship. It was like I'd been raising a stranger under my own roof. I gathered every piece of evidence, messages, receipts, financial statements, and organized it into a timeline. I wanted the truth laid bare, with no room for excuses or manipulation. But the final piece of the puzzle was the timing. I knew they were planning something big. My wife had mentioned moving in with her new man once everything was settled. She didn't realize that by then everything would be mine. The night before everything fell apart, I made one last move. I confronted her again, but this time I let her think she'd won. I apologized, begged even, pretending to be desperate to make things right. She smirked, patted my hand like I was a child, and told me, it's too late for that. She had no idea how right she was. That night, I packed a bag and left quietly. Not because I was running away, but because I wanted them to feel the impact without warning. I went to a hotel and waited. By the next morning, the accounts were locked, the credit cards frozen, and the house legally mine. The car she drove, repossessed. The utilities, disconnected. I even called her boss and let him know she'd been using company time and resources for personal trips. She lost her job that same day. And my daughter? Her college fund, the one I'd worked so hard to build, was emptied and transferred into a trust she couldn't access without my permission. I watched from a distance as their world crumbled. My wife tried to call, but her number was blocked. My daughter sent angry texts, but I didn't respond. I let them panic. I let them feel the ground disappear beneath their feet. They thought they could humiliate me, betray me, and walk away unscathed, but now they were the ones left with nothing. And the best part? They never saw it coming. The morning after I set everything in motion, I sat in my hotel room staring at my phone. I didn't need to call or text anyone. I already knew the chaos had begun. My wife and daughter would be waking up to a completely different reality. I imagined the moment my wife reached for her debit card at the coffee shop, only for it to be declined. I pictured her calling the bank, hearing the automated message about suspicious activity and frozen accounts. She would panic, of course, first annoyed, then afraid. But the real blow would come when she arrived home. I waited a couple of hours before I drove by the house, parking a few blocks away. From my spot, I could see her pacing on the porch, phone pressed to her ear. Her face was red, her movements frantic. She had no idea that her name had already been stripped from the property title. She wasn't just locked out financially, she was locked out legally. Then my daughter came outside. She was yelling at her mother, waving her phone around like it was a weapon. I could only guess that she had just discovered her college fund was gone. All those years of me sacrificing and saving so she could have a better future, and now she was learning that her perfect mom had ruined it all. I felt no sympathy. I wanted to see their world burn, and that's exactly what was happening. I stayed long enough to see my wife get into her car, or rather what she thought was her car. Moments later, I saw her stomp back up the driveway and throw her purse on the ground. She must have figured out it was repossessed. The neighbors started to notice by then. People peeked through curtains and lingered on sidewalks whispering. My wife had always been obsessed with appearances, and now her downfall was playing out like a soap opera for everyone to see. I didn't leave right away. I wanted to savor the moment, but I also wanted to make sure they couldn't twist the narrative. I sent the evidence I'd collected, the messages, the financial records, even photos of her with her lover, to her family and close friends. I wasn't going to let her play the victim. By the end of the day, I heard through mutual contacts that her lover had dumped her. It turned out he wasn't interested in taking care of a broke, jobless woman with a teenage daughter who hated her guts. She thought he was her escape plan, but he abandoned her the moment things got tough. And my daughter? She tried calling me, first crying, then screaming, but I didn't answer. I let her feel the consequences of choosing sides. She had laughed at me, humiliated me, and treated me like garbage. Now she knew what it felt like to be powerless. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. They needed to understand what they had done, not just to me, but to themselves. They had destroyed everything we had, and now they were left with nothing but regret. By the time night fell, the house was dark and the porch light was off. I imagined them inside, sitting in the emptiness, trying to figure out how it all fell apart so quickly. But the truth was, it didn't fall apart. It was dismantled, piece by piece, just like they had dismantled my trust and my dignity. And as I drove away, I didn't feel guilt or sadness. I felt free from the lies, the betrayal, and the humiliation. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of my new life. I spent the next few days tying up loose ends. I met with my lawyer to finalize the paperwork that ensured my wife couldn't touch a single dollar of what I had left. The divorce papers were filed immediately, and thanks to the evidence I'd collected, the process moved faster than I expected. Her infidelity wasn't just humiliating, it was expensive. She walked away with nothing, not even alimony. My daughter was another story. She called me dozens of times, each voicemail angrier than the last. At first it was just yelling, blaming me for ruining everything. But then the messages changed. The anger turned to desperation. She cried, begged me to talk to her, to fix what had happened. But I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because I needed her to learn. She had chosen her side, ridiculed me, and treated me like I didn't matter. I couldn't let her back in until she understood the weight of what she'd done. Meanwhile, my wife tried to fight back. She filed motions to contest the divorce terms, but with the evidence I had, every attempt fell flat. She even reached out to my family, trying to paint herself as the victim, but the truth had already spread. No one was buying her lies anymore. She had burned every bridge, and there was no one left to save her. As for her so-called lover, he disappeared completely. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he blocked her number and moved on. Within days, she had gambled everything for a man who wasn't willing to stand by her when things got hard. The satisfaction of knowing she had to face the consequences of her actions didn't fade quickly. It stayed with me, growing stronger every time I thought about the way they had laughed at me, mocked me, and treated me like I was disposable. But at some point, I stopped caring about what happened to them. I realized that revenge wasn't the only thing I needed. I needed freedom. So I moved. I sold the house, packed my things, and started over in a new city with no reminders of the past, no ghosts haunting me. I focused on rebuilding myself, physically, emotionally, and financially. I hit the gym, not just to look better, but to feel stronger. I picked up hobbies I'd let go of during my marriage. I traveled, met new people, and finally started living for myself. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the memories crept in, when I thought about the family I thought I had and the life I thought I was building. But those moments didn't last long. Every time doubt tried to creep back in, I reminded myself of the truth, how they had treated me, how they had underestimated me. Months later, my daughter finally reached out in a way that felt genuine. She wasn't angry or blaming me anymore. Instead, she was apologetic. She admitted she'd been manipulated, that she had let her mother's bitterness poison her view of me. It wasn't a quick fix. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But we talked. Really talked. And I saw glimpses of the girl I used to know, the one who loved me and respected me before everything fell apart. My wife, on the other hand, never bounced back. She lost more than just money. She lost her reputation, her status, and the comfortable life she had taken for granted. I heard she was living in a small apartment, struggling to hold down a job and drowning in debt. I didn't feel sorry for her, because the truth is, she made her choices. She played her games, thinking she could control everything. But in the end, she lost. And me? I won. Not just because I took back what was mine, but because I proved to myself that I wasn't weak. I wasn't a failure. I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice, and it was freedom. As I sit here in my new apartment, overlooking a city skyline that feels both foreign and liberating, I can't help but dive deeper into the whirlwind of emotions that have defined this chapter of my life. It's been months since I walked away from the wreckage I orchestrated, and while the practical pieces have fallen into place, new job, new routines, new sense of self, the feelings linger like echoes in an empty room. Freedom, yes, that's the word I clung to in those final moments, but it's more nuanced than that. It's a cocktail of triumph laced with sorrow, vindication shadowed by loneliness, and a quiet strength forged in the fires of betrayal. Let me try to unpack it all, not just for you, but for myself. Because putting words to these emotions is the only way I've found to make sense of the chaos. First, there's the anger, that raw, visceral fury that started as a spark and grew into an inferno. When I first saw those messages on her phone, it wasn't just hurt, it was rage. Rage at the deception, at the years I'd poured into a marriage that she treated like a disposable convenience. I remember the heat rising in my chest, my vision blurring as I scrolled through evidence of her double life. How could she? The woman who vowed to stand by me through thick and thin, who shared my bed and my dreams, had reduced me to a punchline in her secret conversations. That anger wasn't fleeting, it simmered, evolving from hot flashes of fury into a cold, strategic resolve. It fueled every late-night plan, every legal maneuver. But now, looking back, I realize anger was my armor. Without it, I might have crumbled. Yet it came at a cost, sleepless nights, where I'd wake up clenching my fists, replaying her mocking words, "You stopped being a man to me a long time ago." Those phrases still sting, but they've lost their power. Anger taught me boundaries, but holding on to it forever would have poisoned me just as her lies did. Beneath the anger, though, was a profound sadness, a grief for what was lost. Our marriage wasn't always a battlefield. There were good years, moments of genuine joy, family vacations where we'd laugh until our sides hurt, quiet evenings watching our daughter grow from a toddler into a young woman. I mourn those memories, tainted now by the revelation that even then, perhaps, the cracks were forming. The sadness hit hardest when I thought about our daughter. Hearing her laugh at my expense, siding with her mother without a second thought, it shattered something paternal in me. She was my little girl, the one I'd rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, the one whose first steps I captured on video. To have her echo her mother's disdain felt like losing a part of my soul. In the quiet hours after I left, I'd sit in that hotel room and cry, not dramatic sobs, but silent tears that soaked my pillow. Sadness for the family unit we'd built, now reduced to ashes. Sadness for her, manipulated by a parent she trusted, and for myself, forced to become the villain in her eyes to reclaim my dignity. Even now, as we've started mending fences, that sadness lingers in the pauses of our conversations, a reminder of the innocence we both lost. Then there's the guilt, that insidious whisper that creeps in uninvited. Did I go too far? Was stripping them of everything, finances, security, even the roof over their heads, justice or cruelty? In the heat of planning, it felt righteous. They had humiliated me, betrayed me in the most intimate ways. But afterward, when I heard through the grapevine about my wife's struggles, bouncing between dead-end jobs, isolated in a dingy apartment, the guilt gnawed at me. Not regret exactly, I stand by my actions as necessary self-preservation. But guilt for the collateral damage, especially to my daughter. Emptying her college fund wasn't about punishment, it was about consequences, about teaching her that choices have ripple effects. Yet, in my darker moments, I wonder if I could have been more merciful. Would a softer approach have spared her the pain? Or would it have enabled the toxicity to continue? Guilt makes me human, I suppose, a counterbalance to the satisfaction of seeing them face reality. It's taught me that revenge, while cathartic, leaves scars on the avenger too. Interwoven with these heavier emotions is a surprising sense of relief, like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Walking away from that house, from the pretense of a happy family, felt like shedding a skin that no longer fit. For so long I'd defined myself through them, husband, provider, father. But in their betrayal, they stripped me of those roles, forcing me to rediscover who I am alone. Relief came in waves. The first time I cooked a meal just for myself, savoring the silence. The gym sessions where sweat washed away the resentment. The solo travels to places I'd always dreamed of but never pursued. It's liberating to realize I don't need validation from anyone else. No more walking on eggshells, no more ignoring the red flags for the sake of peace. This relief has blossomed into gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that pushed me toward growth. Without this ordeal, I might have stayed complacent, fading into a life of quiet dissatisfaction. Now, every sunrise feels like a fresh start, unburdened by the weight of unspoken resentments. Empowerment is another layer, perhaps the most transformative. They called me weak, pathetic, insecure. Those labels became fuel for my reinvention. Proving them wrong wasn't just about financial maneuvers, it was about reclaiming my narrative. I learned to navigate legal systems, manage assets with precision, and stand firm in my worth. Empowerment showed in small victories, negotiating a raise at my new job, making friends who value my story without judgment, even dating again with a guarded but open heart. It's empowering to know I survived the unimaginable, betrayal from the two people I loved most, and emerged stronger. This strength isn't macho posturing, it's quiet resilience, the kind that comes from facing your demons head-on. I feel empowered in my vulnerability too, admitting that the journey hurt, that I'm not invincible. Sharing this now, bearing these emotions, is part of that empowerment. It's me saying, I was broken, but I rebuilt myself piece by piece. Of course, there's hope threading through it all, fragile but persistent. Hope for my relationship with my daughter. Our recent talks have been tentative bridges, built on apologies and understanding. She's growing, seeing her mother's flaws without the rose-tinted glasses. It gives me hope that we can heal, that family bonds, though strained, aren't irreparable. Hope for myself, that this chapter closes the door on bitterness, opening one to genuine connections. Maybe even hope for my ex-wife, in a detached way. Not forgiveness yet, but an acknowledgement that people can change if they choose. Hope keeps the cynicism at bay, reminding me that life isn't defined by one betrayal. Loneliness, though, is the undercurrent I can't ignore. Nights when the apartment feels too quiet, when I scroll through old photos and feel the ache of what could have been. Loneliness for companionship, for the simple act of sharing a meal with someone who knows your history. It's not debilitating. I've learned to fill it with books, hikes, and self-reflection. But it's real, a reminder that humans are wired for connection. This loneliness has made me more empathetic, more intentional in my interactions. I don't take trust for granted anymore. Finally, there's acceptance. The calm after the storm, accepting that people change, that love can sour, that pain is part of the human experience. I've accepted my role in the marriage's decline. Maybe I was too focused on providing materially, neglecting the emotional intimacy. Acceptance doesn't erase the hurt, but it softens its edges, allowing me to move forward without the baggage. In this acceptance, I've found peace, a steady, unshakable peace that no external validation can touch. These emotions, anger, sadness, guilt, relief, empowerment, hope, loneliness, acceptance, they ebb and flow, sometimes crashing like waves, other times lapping gently. They've shaped me into someone wiser, more guarded yet more alive. If there's one takeaway, it's that feelings aren't linear, they're a tapestry, woven from the threads of experience, and in sharing them I honor the man I was, the man I became, and the man I'm still becoming. Life goes on, richer for the scars,